Good morning, councillors. Good morning, members of the executive team, and welcome to the ordinary meeting of the 12th of April 2022. And I also welcome those in the digital gallery to join us this morning. In doing so, I would pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, but also across which the Scenic Regional Council area is formed, that we have the privilege of representing. And to pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and congratulate them on their continued nurture of their culture. For those joining us in the digital gallery this morning, I'd note that I've been advised that we are experiencing technical difficulties with digital connectivity today, which may mean that there are some gaps or interruptions or stalls, as a layperson's comment, in the broadcast, in the live broadcast. However, the final recording will not be interrupted. It is to do with the connectivity, not the recording. If you do experience those problems, the advice is to disconnect and reconnect, and we'll try to continue to remedy that. But be assured that the final recording will be complete as it pertains to today's meeting when it is posted on the council website. I note a full attendance of councillors and a full attendance of the executive team for today's meeting. Therefore, I have no apologies. We are joined this morning by Reverend George Tully of the Uniting Church, Harrisville and Flinders View Parish. George, thank you for joining us, and we'll hand over you to lead us in prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson of the Council. And thank you for inviting me to take part in the opening of the council meeting. As we approach Easter and as we look at our world, we have little doubt that there is a huge need of continuing change. Continuing change in the world out there, and continuing change in people whom we know and in us as people as well. I think that as I look back over even the last couple of weeks, I think of families that I've dealt with. One, mum and dad and two kids living in a haunted house. A short time with them and prayer in the house, their life has been dramatically changed. And they're asking me, what can I do to thank you? Another guy who was in Australia went to his home country, became disillusioned and came back disillusioned to Australia. He said, how can I ever thank you enough? It's an amazing way in which the Christ of Easter is relevant to life today. Let us pray. Father, as each of us contemplate this Easter period, for many a holiday period, yet you are present with each person, irrespective of our attitude, irrespective of what we are doing. Continue to make yourself relevant to each of us, particularly as those in council make decisions that affect a large number of people who live in that area. May your blessing be and continue with the meeting and each of the councillors present. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, George. Greatly appreciate your assistance and support this morning, and certainly a treasured time of year for us. So thank you. Understand that you may have other business today. You are certainly welcome to continue with us through the digital gallery. But again, greatly appreciated. Look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Councillors, before we move to item 5, which is the declarations of prescribed or declarable conflicts of interest, the GM, Council Sustainability, has asked to introduce some advice for councillors which will affect what occurs in item 5. So I'm going to invite him to do so now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, councillors and the general public. Firstly, a quick apology for the late notice and inconvenience this may cause. However, I would like to notify of a late change in the published agenda. Based on the recent discussions and learning, it's considered that in order for council to better deal with the matters pertaining to agenda items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4, will be required to withdraw those items so as to allow some revision to be undertaken. The intention, Mr. Mayor and councillors, is that these will be retabled at the earliest convenience following the necessary consultation.
Thank you. Councillors, noting the withdrawal of items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4, we now consider item 5, declarations for prescribed and declarable conflicts of interest. With those noting that amended agenda, are there any such declarations? Absence of any declarations. Move to item 6, announcements, mayoral minutes. I do have this morning an announcement, councillors, that I'd like to share. Some of you will be aware, but it's an opportunity for us to ensure that we're consistent. Councillors, since the winners of the 2021 Qantas Australian Tourism Awards were announced on the 18th of March 2022, Council has been advised that we were awarded a highly commended for the richest place on earth in Australia campaign. As you're aware, in 2021, Council submitted an entry for our richest place on earth in Australia campaign to the Queensland Tourism Awards in the category of the Richard Power Award for Destination Marketing and Campaigns. On the 12th of November 2021, it was announced that our entry had won the award and was, as a result, a finalist in this category at the 2021 Qantas Australian Tourism Awards, with the winners to be announced on the Sunshine Coast on the 18th of March 2022. We learned on the night that we were not successful, however have subsequently been advised by the judging panel that we've been awarded a highly commended award for our entry. The feedback stated that this honour was only awarded to a very select group of operators. The judges' feedback also advised that our entry was a wonderful detailed submission of very high quality that scored well in all areas and great results. Well done. The evidence across our economy is this program has not only attracted great interest in our region, but also generated significant economic benefits. I'd like to offer councillors congratulations to our regional prosperity team for their excellent work in this area and for the ongoing efforts to market our destination to the visitor economy. Councillors, with regard to the 2022 Top Tourism Towns Awards, secondly, I'd also like to advise that Council has recently assisted the preparation of 4 entries for the upcoming Top Tourism Town Awards. Tamborine Mountain, Canungra, Boona and Kelba have all been entered based on population categories. The award winners will be announced in June. We wish our entrants well. Thank you, councillors. Item 7, I'm not advised of any deputations for today or petitions to be tabled. So we move to item 8 on our agenda, which pertains to the consideration of the minutes from the prior meeting. Councillors, we've all had access to these. There is a recommendation before us that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on 22nd of March 2022 be adopted. Unless there's further conversation, I would seek a mover first. Councillor West, are there any questions or clarifications, councillors? If not, I seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell, wish to speak at all? Councillor West?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 9. I'm not aware of any business arising from those minutes that is to be dealt with today. So we move to item 10, which deals with the business of the meeting today. And we move to item 10.1. I turn to the GM, Customer and Regional Prosperity, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors, Executive and everyone listening online. Today, officers will be joining me shortly to present the Queensland Parliamentary Inquiry into Social Isolation and Loneliness. Councillors would be aware that in May 2021, the Minister for Communities and Housing and Minister for Digital Economy and Minister for Arts, the Honourable Leanne Enoch, announced a parliamentary inquiry into social isolation and loneliness in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. The Queensland Parliament then subsequently invited feedback as a part of the consultation process, and Council provided a formal submission in August of 2021 to contribute feedback on behalf of the Scenic Rim community. The community's final report was tabled at the Community Support and Services Committee on the 6th of December in 2021, and this report seeks to update Council on the Queensland Parliamentary Inquiry into Social Isolation and Loneliness in Queensland, report number 14, the 57th Parliament Community Support and Services Committee, December 2021. And I have with me today our Principal Specialist of Community Development, Kathy Forrest, and Manager of Community and Culture, Deborah Moore. And I would like to ask Kathy just to provide some highlights in relation to the recommendations, the inquiry, its findings and Council submission. Thanks, Kathy.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, just to step you through some of the key points of the report, if I can, and obviously it's been a great opportunity for Scenic Rim to put a formal submission into the parliamentary inquiry on such an important issue. So the committee's task was to inquire into and report on the nature and extent of the impact of social isolation and loneliness experienced in Queensland, to identify the causes and drivers and the protective factors available in society that might mitigate the problem. The terms of reference also required the committee to inquire into and report on the potential benefits of addressing social isolation and loneliness, which are significant both at that individual and at a Queensland community level. We tried to highlight in the report, and forgive me if I missed some of that initial introduction, a lot of this was around COVID as well, and the lockdowns and a lot of families being separated. So I guess it raised the issue even more so during the COVID experience we're having the last 2 years. So basically the committee also learned, just on that alone, social isolation and loneliness is not clearly or universally defined or easily identified. One person may be socially isolated but never feel lonely, while another may have strong links to community through their work or their family, but for various reasons feel isolated or lonely. The committee also learned that there's no single action or treatment to end social isolation and loneliness, which is the ongoing challenges I guess we're all faced with. In the report we've highlighted that they've received 196 submissions, so that speaks volumes really to the amount of interest they had in this project. I won't go through we've tried to highlight that it was obviously local governments, but there's a lot of community groups and peak bodies who wanted to be part of this process. And then the committee delivered 14 recommendations, and we've just tried to include in this particular report, some of them weren't relevant to local government, but we feel that recommendation 2, for example, they want to, Queensland Government is going to try and clearly define social isolation and loneliness to create a common discourse and ensure consistent language to enhance understanding of these issues across Queensland and to support appropriate policy responses. So that's a good step in that direction. And then some of the other recommendations was to reflect on the work and the research in the other jurisdictions to identify best practice. They recommend that the Queensland Government identify the most suitable tool to measure social isolation and loneliness, and we all know that that will be a challenge in itself, but they want to gather that longitudinal data for the Queensland context, and that'll assist in the allocation of resources in the future. So that's a space to watch. They also recommended the Queensland Government consider the development of online induction and training opportunities for volunteers who contribute to programs aimed at preventing and responding to social isolation and loneliness, and that would certainly be relevant to our region we do have some good statistics around volunteering in our community, and for example the likes of Meals on Wheels volunteers and those who work in hospital auxiliaries. The committee also recommended that they develop a 10-year statewide strategy to address social isolation, and we just pointed out there that it is a complex matter. Just moving on to that next paragraph, it takes a whole of community response to achieve meaningful outcomes for those impacted, and the many organisations and agencies that are already committed to addressing these issues. And in addition to that mainstream knowledge and awareness, I guess a lot of us feel we have, the inquiry has gathered extensive local, state, national and even global evidence, as well as personal stories to shine a spotlight on these important issues that affect every community. We've tried to highlight the causes and drivers, and you've got the report in front of you. We've got research from UQ and Australian National University, so there's been a lot of research involved in here, but an important point there that contributing to loneliness is the decline in civic engagement and membership of organisations, clubs and societies, highlighting that the proportion of Australians who are not a member of any organisations rose from 28% in 2019 to 36% in 2021, and I guess we'll have figures again in the next financial year. And then highlighting that the Australian Loneliness Report is thought to arise because an innate need to belong to a group is unmet, and therefore loneliness signals a need to form a meaningful connection with others, and I'm sure everybody in the room can relate to that statement. It's quite a lengthy report, so I might just jump to a number of stakeholders identified young people as a particularly vulnerable group impacted by social isolation, because it can often be perceived that it's an older person's issue, and it's not. In the school-age population, social disconnectedness results in loneliness, which increases depression, anxiety, eating disorders, suicidal ideation and self-harm, and the Queensland Alliance for Mental Health has backed that up, reporting that studies have shown that in young adults, loneliness often occurs simultaneously with the likes of anxiety, depression and self-harm. In some of the protective factors, and as you move through the report, we've highlighted like the quality, not quantity of relationships is an important factor. People without families have been found to experience higher rates of loneliness. Loneliness can include protective factors known to mitigate loneliness and social isolation include connection with people outside a person's immediate family circle and opportunities for natural social interactions. And it's also been revealed, and many of us would know, secure and stable housing is also a protective factor for social isolation. It also revealed investment in infrastructure and green spaces and people being able to, I guess, recreate and walk and feel safe in their communities. If they feel threatened, they don't tend to go out. So that was highlighted throughout the report. And they just pointed out that the walking strategy that the Queensland Government is aiming to achieve some of those mitigation strategies. It's led the way through innovative programs, but even in their own report, they're highlighting that they haven't allocated enough funding in that space as well. So there's still quite a lot of work to be done. It's not about criticising anything, I guess it's just about us having this conversation. We then touch on physical activity. We also know that's a protective factor, and there's a University of the Third Age advised the committee that programs and levels of social engagement offered by U3A allow the opportunity for all individuals to increase physical health and well-being and to become intellectually stimulated within a social setting, and that's a very important piece. There's a whole range of things going on there. And there's a lovely article in, I think, the Beaudesert Times recently, or one of the local newspapers, around the great work that the U3A has been doing in our local community. So again, just pointing out that there is a whole of community response. A number of submissions there again pointed out how volunteering can promote social inclusion, so we wanted to include that in the report, and our ongoing work that Council does to volunteering and supporting volunteers is an important piece. Then it touches on employment and education. We tried to pull that out of the report as well, and probably touching again on some of the educational institutions to keep young people engaged. So again, just reminding everybody that young people can be susceptible to social isolation. Potential benefits, we really just wanted to highlight the many things that Council is already doing. We've listed a whole range of programs and activities, but it's important to note just before that is that cost-benefit analysis that's been done. Department of Communities, Housing and Digital Economy provided examples of the costs and identified benefits of some of the initiatives and programs that are funded by the department. For example, the Queensland Families and Community Association's Neighbourhood Centre Survey results of 2020 report states that $4.08 of social value goes back into communities from every dollar of state government funding. Addressing social isolation and loneliness will have major social and economic benefits, reduce the burden of loneliness and reduce morbidity and mortality. And even for some of the reports we've also presented previously, the Chief Health Officer report has also identified that for every dollar invested in health and wellbeing programs, and that's around the preventative health, not necessarily medical, delivers a $14 return on investment. So we just wanted to highlight there's been some really good return on investment and measuring tools that are being developed. And as I've said there's a whole range of programs right across councils, teams, and even the Cuppa and the Community Project. Just wanted to highlight that that's Queensland Health funded, so that's Queensland Government investing in that program, but realising that it's probably done quite better at that grassroots level, so we're delivering that out in the community at the moment, so that funding application was successful. Just jumping to Council's role at network and interagency and mental health meetings, that's a big part of the conversation and ongoing conversations we're having. And we also just wanted to highlight, or not just, but wanted to highlight council and community-based organisations, and we've listed things like Meals on Wheels, U3A, Men's Shed, CWA. There's a whole range of groups there that are doing some really good work in the community and connecting those in a positive way. And then we just wanted to highlight in the report around the budget and financial. Council already delivers a range of community and culture programs to address social isolation and loneliness within existing operational budgets. And similarly, there are many other areas of council delivering a diverse range of programs which make a positive contribution to the broader community. And I guess outcomes from the inquiry are validating council's investment in existing community and culture programs and other areas of council. And the Parliamentary Committee's findings provide important data and information to potentially improve future programming and or budget considerations. I'm happy to take any questions to all of that. It's quite a large report, as you know, and it was quite a large submission process.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions for clarification to the report? Noting that there's a very extensive attachment that worked through as well. Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor, and happy to direct this question to Cathy or the GM as appropriate. And thank you for an excellent report. I think that certainly highlighted the important role that we play in the community and both also the community groups that do participate. My question is, I believe that Council, as a council, Scenic Rim has for many years delivered and supported many great community projects and programs that, among other things, support people who are impacted by social isolation and loneliness. However, as a relatively small regional council covering a large area, resources are limited. So my question is there an expectation that the state government will provide additional funding to support the outcomes and recommendations of this inquiry?
I don't believe there's an expectation per se. We've been very grateful for the Queensland Health funding for projects like Cuppa in the community, which our submission was obviously successful because it addressed the eligibility criteria around social isolation. So, of course, we would welcome any ongoing funding, and I guess the committee's or the parliamentary inquiry's findings will reveal whether they will dedicate perhaps directly to this type of programming. But at this stage, it's really hard to predict, I guess, what the Queensland Government will do with the parliamentary findings. We know that they invest directly in the likes of Beaucare and Fassfern Community Centre directly in our region under the community centre funding, and they've been part of that broader neighbourhood centre survey as well. And because they do a lot of that client-based programming. A lot of that funding potentially could be increased for those community centres. And I think it's an ongoing piece of work that we're continually to advocate, if we can, even as a local government, and I think the other councils will stand shoulder to shoulder with us on that. So I think we've just got to keep, and we're having the conversation. The fact that this is included on an ordinary meeting agenda, and we've been given the given the approval to put that submission in as a formal submission on behalf of council. I think it is an ongoing piece of work, and it is really because it's so complex. And I think we've talked about some of this stuff before. It's not a one-size-fits-all either. We've got to keep looking at that place-based and working with the local community groups and our volunteer groups and understanding what's best for them. And look, even though I think the community grants goes a long way to supporting a lot of these projects, our own local grants program funds a lot of community-based programs delivered on the ground. So I think we're certainly, as a council, doing a lot to address these issues. It certainly helps with the inquiry's findings to validate what we're doing. And yeah, maybe it's more about we keep advocating to the Queensland Government and ensuring that this stays on the agenda. We keep talking about it. We keep putting that social isolation and loneliness lens over a lot of the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor McInnes?
Yes, Kathy, congratulations. It's very well done. My question is, how do we identify people as a country communities? We probably know our neighbours better than others, and I take your point about younger people. Sometimes people can have a lot of people around them but still be lonely, but probably my thought process is for the older people who are living at home alone, and neighbours often do check on them and everything else, but you won't see them coming to the cuppa in the community. You won't see them coming out, often introverted type people. How do we, these that slip through the cracks, I suppose, that, I know there's different people and different organisations that go and check on some of these people, but there's probably 3 times as many in the community than we realise around the place. How do we go out and identify those people?
Yeah, and it is really difficult. And I guess if you notice someone who used to attend a lot of events and suddenly stops attending, or their participation rate drops off, that's an indicator. And you've raised a good point that we all have a responsibility to check in on our neighbours, and that's even an important part of the work that we've done with the cuppa in the community. And forgive me, it's also, we got some age-friendly money a little while ago under some Queensland Government funding, and we developed little neighbour cards, and you can even just drop them in the letterbox of a neighbour, and it says, do you need help with getting some groceries or picking up some medication? So we've got these little neighbour cards. And Councillor, it's an ongoing piece of work. There's no simple answer to that question, but I think we all have a responsibility to check in rather than just go about our busy lives and forget to ask those questions of our neighbours or pick up the phone. Again, I think our community centres do some really good work. The local hospitals also, when people are discharged from hospital, that's a risk factor, and we know that they've got social workers within the hospitals who do a phone call and check in, and often they've got access to that family person within that client's family, and they can actually check in with that family as well. But it's incumbent upon all of us, I think, to make sure we keep checking with all of our neighbours and putting that lens over our programming. And if we're hosting community events that are out there, just really trying to encourage, maybe looking at our marketing a bit more that resonates with people. And we all know that not everyone has good internet, so a good old-fashioned hard copy brochure being dropped in the mail could be quite helpful. We have ongoing conversations with Meals on Wheels. They're obviously more than just a meal, as the Meals on Wheels will tell you. There'll be that point of contact at the door, and for the older members of the community, that's often usually what happens. It's that touch point, and it's about arming that organisation up with all of the right tools so they can have all the right conversations and just keep checking in.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll I note that obviously it is a body of work and there's a fair bit there. Are there any additional comments in response to the report, just because it's such an extensive body and we've asked some questions? Are there any additional comments? Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I just want to really highlight Kathy's comments that it is a responsibility of all of us in the community, because it most definitely is. And I guess we have a lot of new people moving to our areas, and sometimes we don't always reach out to those people, but they are new, and certainly it's very important that we do reach out to those people and make sure that they are aware of the community groups that they may want to join, because I'm sure a lot of us find on committees that we already are on, often there is the comments that we're the new people to town, and maybe they are feeling anxious about coming along to those meetings. So most definitely I just want to highlight that it's an issue for everybody in our community.
Agreed. And can I just throw in a point around the libraries? I think they're an important touch point for new members. You'll often find that's the first place they go to, and the libraries are well aware and they provide great services. They've got information within libraries, and we do have the new resident kits that we do as well, and just updating that with new information all the time. So just making sure that information's included as well.
Thank you. Councillor Enright. You.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the community groups that do so much in our communities, and I think the support that Council provides to them to enable them to do that is a great partnership. Without selecting a particular group, one does come to mind, and Kathy touched on it earlier, but as at U3A have 340 members, and they've got about 20 odd different activities with facilitators or tutors that provide a range of activities that really does involve and encourage people to participate. And without too much indulgence, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of the outgoing president, Andy Fechner, who has been the president of U3A for 8 years and grown the organisation from 100 members to 340, and a great community member. And I think this would be replicated in all of our communities, and a big shout out to the fantastic work that all of our community groups do throughout our region.
Thank you, Councillor. Any additional comments? Just while you contemplate that, it was a sobering report to read through, councillors, and the report we've summarised today, as well as our submission. But noting some of the comments today, it's very pertinent that, yes, the report talks about a range of recommendations, a range of programs, and a whole range of networks that create a fabric to try to capture those people that Councillor McGuinness referred to slipping through the cracks. But at the end of the day, socialisation and loneliness are actually personal events, not program events. And that's the challenge that faces us with everything we do, that you cannot create the perfect solution for every person. You deal with what you have available, and it is beholden on the wider fabric of community, the different volunteer groups, the different community groups, and the different community members to take the time to play their part. But it was very clear in the commentary that what affects one person in community may not affect another in the same way. And councillors, I think that's a great reminder for us that something that we may see as trivial in fact has high impacts on another individual. And whenever we find ourselves looking at something that way, we need to be mindful of the eyes and the view from the person who is on the receiving end of that, to condition ourselves in how we're thinking about things. The other great concern was the diminishing volunteerism, which is impacting us in many ways. That's quite often due to the pressures of life, the people to make ends meet for multi-income families and so forth, which is creating that challenge across all of our community groups as well. And it's a bigger issue than we can solve on our own, but it certainly is a factor that has a great impact across our distributed communities, where so much of the support fabric is through community groups rather than through the structured provision of the state. I think that last The important note that I read in the report is that the Queensland Parliament have indicated that they will support and implement the recommendations of the report, and that goes to the issue of funding. A number of those recommendations actually require a significant action and activation by the state. Whilst I haven't seen a budget announcement of it, it certainly requires specific activities and focuses to be implemented. So I can only rely on that undertaking and would welcome that bringing better strength to support our communities. Any further comments, councillors? If not, I'll ask the GM to introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and councillors. The recommendation before you today is that 1, Council note the contents of the Queensland Parliamentary Committee's inquiry into social isolation and loneliness in Queensland, report number 14, 57th Parliament Community Support and Services Committee, December 2021. 2, that Council acknowledge the broad and diverse range of programs that are currently being delivered by Council and community-based organisations across the geographically dispersed communities of the Scenic Rim region to address social isolation and loneliness. And 3, that Council acknowledge its ongoing commitment to addressing social isolation and loneliness will continue to align with the corporate and community plans to support key priorities already identified by Council and Scenic Rim residents.
Thank you, GM. Councillors, there's a recommendation. I firstly seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Any additional questions, councillors? If not, I'll seek any further discussion. If not, I'll seek a seconder. I think Councillor West. Thank you. Councillor Enright, you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly endorse this motion. As has been outlined, Council plays an important role, but importantly, the opportunity of this parliamentary inquiry enabled us to provide information that is relevant to our communities and provided the relevant information that enables future decisions to be made to support the important role that community plays in the ability to minimise isolation and loneliness. Given the last couple of years that we've been through with COVID restrictions, I think the timing is very important, and I commend this report. I thank the staff for their involvement in participation in providing that submission, and certainly endorse this recommendation or this motion for your support.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? I would just add a comment and endorse and support the motion before us, and am mindful that the report also alludes to the broad range of activities and programs that Council does play an active part in support of our community. Some we do get funding for, some are part of what we prepare into our normal programming or our extension program through our operational plan. And just encourage and acknowledge councillors that we've continued to consider that important in our budgeting processes in prior years, and we'll be considering those matters again at present, and this report reminds us of the importance of continuing to fund those vital activities for our community. Commend the motion. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you indeed for bringing that to our attention, and thank you for leading the charge in consolidating the submission and continuing to play such a vital role in the implementation of these important activities. Councillors, we move to item 10.2, which is on page 170 of today's agenda, in case you were searching for it. For those listening in digitally, it's a long way through. There was quite a body to that last report. And GM, we're back with you to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. And 10.2 is a regional events update, which we do on a regular basis to council. And the purpose of this report today is to provide an overall update on regional events, in particular targeted events that are attracting visitors to the region and generally delivered by council. And then others that in 2021 have included events that will receive support from council under the council's Regional Events Grants Program. Today I have with me the Principal Specialist of Regional Events, Scott McDuff, and Scott will also take us through a progress update on the current planning and delivery of two new events in the region, the Long Sunset and Escape in the Scenic Rim. So I'll ask Scott to go through some of the highlights of the report and the grants that are have been delivered to community, and then we'd be happy to take any questions. So over to you, Scott.
Since December 2020, Regional Events Grants Program, posted on the Smarty Grants online platforms, has supported 13 events held in 2021 in the Scenic Rim. It's a total contribution of $30,350, but it's resulted in a positive projected economic return to the region of $3.99 million. This figure is calculated via information supplied to us from the event coordinators, research data from Tourism Research Australia, and that information is then entered into industry software economy.iz. Applications are consistently being received for council support of new and restarting events to the Smarty Grants platform. And now it's working. The regional events team are also mentoring community event coordinators in planning safe delivery of regional events and festivals now that they are restarting. The Long Sunset. Council commenced planning for a major outdoor concert event in February 2020 in partnership with Queensland Music Festival. The event has been planned for delivery on multiple dates since April 2021, but ongoing effects of COVID-19 have caused the event to be rescheduled due to lockdowns, border closures, venue availability, and the unavailability of suitable special guest artists. Under a memorandum of understanding executed between Council and QMF are responsible for music programming, contracting artists, marketing, ticketing, production event. Council will take the lead on event delivery, event infrastructure and management, and venue management alongside on-site camping, parking, food and beverage services. Earlier this year, Council and Queensland Music Festival decided to once again postpone the event due to COVID-19 and the lack of sufficient supply chain of the pandemic. But a new event date has been identified, and Long Sunset will be held on Saturday, 30th of April, at Aquis Elysian Fields. Scenic Rim community aspects of this event are the Artisan Alley, coordinated by Tambourine Mountain Arts Collective, local support artists on stage, plus by Desert Rotary, who will be providing Friday night barbecue to those who are camping, and the Rural Fire Service, who are going to coordinate parking on site. Escape in the Scenic Rim. Following the success of Gondwana Festival 2021, Council has taken the lead in presenting this festival again in 2022 under a new name, Escape in the Scenic Rim. The new festival aligns with Council's regional prosperity strategy, tourism strategy, and soon to be adopted, Council's adventure and nature-based tourism strategy. Escape in the Scenic Rim will build on the success of the Gondwana Festival and will include walks, climbs, talks, wild adventures from Tambourine Mountain all the way to Arachula in the west. Expressions of interest for Escape in the Scenic Rim were emailed to prospective event holders, and members of Regional Prosperity and Communications team have personally met with 30 tourism operators and accommodation service providers to raise awareness and encourage participation in this new event. Tickets are now on sale to over 50 events, and 3 events for Escape in the Scenic Rim have already sold out. The Regional Events Program has an annual budget of $60,000 to support events in our region, and soon IER Proprietary Limited will be engaged to assess and survey and evaluate selected events throughout 2023, future years, to provide detailed data and actual economic benefits generated to our region. The Long Sunset has been successful in obtaining $145,000 from Austrade's Regional Tourism Bushfire Recovery Grants Program and $55,000 from the Drought Communities Program. QMF will contribute cash and in-kind support to the Long Sunset, and Council will also assist with in-kind support and the funding from Austrade and Drought Communities funding. Escape in the Scenic Rim has an operational budget allocation of $50,000. This has offset Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Fund, successful on application to that fund, and Council received $100,000 for this event. In future, Council has submitted grant applications for the Building Better Regions Fund for both events, new events along Sunset and Escape in the Scenic Rim.
Thank you. Councillors, questions. You've had the access to the report, but certainly any questions? Councillors? Councillor West?
I just wondered.
Councillor, microphone.
Is it not? Sorry, it doesn't seem to be working, does it? Oh, yes, it is now. Okay. Just those two events back in May of last year, I just wondered what the Rogue Raid was and the Dust Hustle, please. Were they?
Rogue Raid was an adventure race delivered by Rogue Adventure, a Brisbane company, and Dust Hustle is an enduro motorcycle event held at Queensland Motor Park for amateur riders and any type of motorcycle who decide to ride their bike. It could be a road bike or dirt bike or even a postie scooter at Queensland Motor Park in a race.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, did you have a further question?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. A question to the GM, if I may. The report, as Scott mentioned, the report outlines the regional events grant program supported 13 events in 2021 with a total contribution of $30,350, and that resulted in the positive projected economic return to the Scenic Rim of just under $4 million. My question is, and without disclosing any commercial in confidence information, could you please provide an overview of how this economic return has been beneficial across the region?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. The concept of this particular program is quite distinct to the other events that are run by the community development team, which are more civic and community events. So regional events is expressly targeting external visitors, attracting external visitors to the region. The events are being modelled in Economy ID, as Scott pointed out, and the basis of which those figures are modelled, they're put into an event modelling tool that builds out of the spend per stay for each or daily spend of visitors to the region. The idea of these events is twofold. Whilst it provides an opportunity to attract visitors to the region, it also provides much needed respite and spirit-raising activities for our local community. Generally, the investment that we're seeing in these events is attracting visitors who, and our ulterior motive is that we get repeat visitation. We want to see visitors fall in love with the region when they come for any specific event and return to us for rest and relaxation, family holiday, and compounding, I guess, the ultimate economic input through the operation of the event, but more lasting input over a longer period of time. This can be through word of mouth, through social media, through people sharing and posting the experiences that they have, and I'm very much expecting that Escape in the Scenic Rim will see a lot of media, social media in particular, as the team has also put together an ambassador program for Escape in the Scenic Rim, and people have nominated to become an ambassador for no remuneration, but will then blog and post details of the events that they participate in the Scenic Rim. And there's nothing more reassuring when it comes from a real person rather than potential marketing hype. So from our perspective, staging these events are a significant contribution to the local economy and a deliberate attempt to us to keep driving visitation to the region, whether that be for sporting, cultural, community or boutique events, or whether it's just for the pure natural beauty that we offer as a region. This is a deliberate strategy of council to partner with both the events and tourism industry, and I think the fact that the events that are being held, and the 13 in particular that have been successful in the grant rounds, Scott and the team also work with them on improving their event management skills, mentoring them, assisting them with traffic management, developing safety and risk plans. So it's also a sidebar benefit, the legacy of being able to grow those events through via the very nature of the partnership that's been developed with many of them now. And we're actually seeing many of those events look at repeat events, either a couple of times a year or every year in the Scenic Rim. And some of those providers would have never considered operating events here had we not put this program together and marketed this as an excellent destination for events of many different shapes, colours and sizes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for that
David.
response. Councillor Chalk?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the same sort of line of questioning, you've highlighted the positive impacts that these events have on our region. Have you identified any negative impacts that they have on our region and associated costs of those impacts, like our roads and infrastructure?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. I haven't identified very many negatives. I suppose, if you want to call it a positive that could be considered a negative is our lack of accommodation in our region. But the positive side of that is of recent times, due to COVID lockdowns and people unable to travel, that everybody seems to own a caravan or some form of camper trailer. So our camping for events is virtually exploding. Scenic Rim Clydesdale Spectacular is an example of that, where in 2019 their attendance was about 3,500. In 2021 their attendance was 7,500, and their expected attendance this year is well over 10,000. But their planning now is around the amount of campers and caravanners that will travel, whether it be grey nomads or even younger members of the population who now own caravans. They can travel to events. That, of course, is also increasing our positive economic return because they're staying in the region for longer than one night. They're staying for 2 to 3 nights for an event. So could be seen as a negative, but it's turning into a positive for our events.
I'd also be happy to add to that. We do an event assessment process as well, and there have been events in recent times that the council has not gone ahead with permits because of potential negative impacts to the local area, and there's been a couple of examples. One recently in Coralban over the Christmas New Year period. So the team, the permitting team and the regional events team do work together to identify, along with planning, whether there is any significant issues related to a location or destination that someone's proposing to hold an event. We haven't specifically identified, to the other part of your question about road impact, at this point in time we haven't specifically identified any individual impact as a direct result of an event to the road network, over and above, I guess, any agriculture or truck movements or other movements across the region. It's very difficult to determine where some of that road damage stem from when a lot of our roads are very busy for the purposes of businesses operating in the region as well.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Just while you contemplate that, perhaps a supplementary question on notice for the GM asset environmental sustainability for a future occasion in light of, I won't need you to respond this morning, just to take note of in light of, I think Councillor Chalk's question would be at a future time when we're updating around your portfolio if there are examples of those additional costs or negative impacts that are identified in seeing additional wear and tear or additional cost in. We're aware, for instance, that where we have pump-out toilet facilities in high event seasons, we know we we carry additional costs. Having the visibility of that would be an example, I think, of what Councillor Chalk was seeking to understand, if I interpret your question. So that might be a way to get that additional information. Councillor, is that a reasonable understanding of the additional clarity you were seeking?
Yes, Mr Mayor. We sort of highlighted the positive impacts, so we just need to be aware of any negatives and make sure that we go forward in a balanced way.
Thank you. So just note that for a future appropriate occasion as part of your reporting. If that's okay, GM and CEO. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional comments that add value to this context today? I would just make the comment that it has, as I've been out across the regional communities of late, there is a real sense of optimism in our business communities. And even this morning, a number of people just expressing that the energy they're seeing in the market and how they're seeing the strengthening of the returns through their business, which is encouraging, and they're in some of those visitor economy, cafe related sectors. I think that's encouraging to see. The obvious piece is that the brand of the region has gained great recognition that we get. We talked earlier about the marketing campaign, but the branding of the region, as was highlighted in this report, as a really attractive location because of our proximity to some large population centres for easy access for high calibre events is certainly something that's bringing a benefit, but I do share the constant challenge that we face of not destroying the goose that is laying the golden egg, and that our environmental precincts and our rural precincts, we need to always find the point of balance to not destroying that which makes us special. Councillor McConnell, you had a comment?
Just back to a question, if I could.
Right,
just to the GM, just back to the budget. The annual total is $60,000 per year allocated to this. It doesn't include in-kind infrastructure support such as rubbish bins and bollards. Is there a cost at the moment that would cover all of those events that's been provided?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. So I think what Scott was saying in the report is that the 60,000 is given out in grants, and excuse me, that the capture of the in-kind component is captured under the council's community grants in-kind budget. So you'll see each year Kathy and her team report on the bins and other in-kind support that's been provided to the council. It's captured in that budget line where all the in-kind is.
But purely for these, is it 13 events? Purely for these 13 events, we have a budget of 60,000, but we could have another. How much in-kind support?
Do you know that value off the top of your head, or we may need to take the question on notice?
I'd have to take it and come back to you, councillor, but it varies for every event to their request
that's right.
to council.
I'm just after a total, so if we could get the total in-kind support for the events listed in the report.
Which indeed, councillor, I would just observe from my recollection of how it comes through visibility, it's consolidated with the community/civic events, so it might need that might be an additional task to identify and separate. I think that's why there's a few quizzical looks.
Yes, no, that's correct, Mayor. So it is captured through that other program, and we should be able to provide that.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? If not, I'll ask the GM to introduce the recommendation for this item.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ask, with the indulgence of council, to add a few words to this recommendation, just for clarity for when it's referred to in future. Sharon, I think it'll be obvious as I read them out. The recommendation is that 1, council acknowledge the 13 regional events held during 2021 that was supported through the council's regional events grant program to the value of $33,500. And 2, council acknowledge the new events currently being planned and delivered in early 22, the Long Sunset and the Escape in the Scenic Rim.
Thank you, GM. Councillors, is that clear what that wording consists of? We just didn't want to project it back up on the screen and blind the officer at the moment.
Thank you, Mayor. So just for clarity, I added the words 13 and the value of $33,500, and I added the 2 event names.
Yep, thank you. Seek a mover. Councillor McGuinness. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional discussion to the item? If not, seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell. Councillor McGuinness, you wish to speak?
No, right, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is an excellent report on progress in regional events for our region, and I'd like to pick up on just one particular comment that the GM made, and I think that's about people loving the Scenic Rim. And I think what we have seen with the brand awareness, we have certainly seen that, and the feedback I've received is that people love the Scenic Rim, and I'm sure that this will assist us in many ways throughout the region.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else seeking leave to speak additionally? Councillor McGuinness, anything you wish to close? No, thank you. We put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. I note that we have item 10.3. It's quite a considerable offer. It starts on page 177 of the agenda. Councillors, because we're approaching 20 past 10 and we're only a few minutes away from our scheduled break, I'm going to propose that we actually pause now for 20 minutes. Thank you to the officers for being prompt in arriving and preparing, but we'll give you 20 minutes to prepare and then we will return. So we'll adjourn the meeting so that we can take that break, and we will return at 10:40, which is a bit over 20 minutes. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Yep. Okay. Welcome back, councillors and executive. Welcome back to those joining us in the digital gallery. We resume the meeting considering item 10.3. GM Customer and Regional Prosperity, did you kindly introduce this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Item 10.3 is MCU 19/027. It's a development permit for material change of use for a service station at 2571 Beaudesert Beanley Road, Tamborine, and lot 144 RP 151365. Today I have in the room with me Manager of Regional Development, Health and Biodiversity, Mark Lohman, the Acting Principal Specialist Development Assessment and Engineering, Joseph Kirkwood, and Senior Planner with us today is Frank Andrews. I'd like to hand over to the team to take you through this application.
Thank you, Deborah. The site for the service station is 2571 Beaudesert Beanley Road, Tamborine, and for those that know the area, that's the turn-off to Canungra near Tamborine House. The development application proposes the construction of new commercial facilities at the intersection of two state control roads on land currently improved by a dwelling house and associated sheds. The rest of the lot is used for small-scale grazing. The site is also heavily affected by riverine flooding and is wholly mapped as being flood affected under the planning scheme overlay maps. The application is lodged under the now superseded Beaudesert Shire Planning Scheme 2007 and is impact accessible in this zone. So the zoning of the site is in the rural zone, in the rural residential precinct. So whilst it's being assessed under the planning scheme of the old Beaudesert Shire, it is also being considered against the current Scenic Rim planning scheme as a relevant matter. Under both planning schemes, the level of assessment was impact accessible and was inconsistent development. The applicant has provided multiple technical reports, and they're quite comprehensive, and plans in support of the application. And the reports are quite numerous, and they include an acoustic report, architectural plans, economic needs assessment, environmental management plans, a flood impact assessment, flood emergency management plan, lighting impact, landscape statement of intent, stormwater management, traffic report, and on-site wastewater treatment report. The application has been the subject of extensive requests for further information, both formally and informally, which the applicant has responded to as well. So the applicant is seeking to develop a service station to cater for both trucks and cars. A convenience restaurant in the form of fast food and drive-through tenancy is also proposed to be incorporated into the development. The proposed trading hours are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the next, the convenience centre is comprised of an internal tenancy of 133 square metres and a 40-metre alfresco and drive-through facility. The building also includes a 37 square metre mezzanine area above the convenience restaurant, the alfresco dining area that is to be used as an emergency evacuation point in the case of a major flood event. The proposed development will be positioned on elevated hard stand areas that will accommodate the following. There's 32 standard car parking spaces, 10 larger vehicle parking spaces, a drive-through facility for 14 queued vehicles, 8 standard vehicle and car filling bowsers, and 6 large vehicle or truck fueling bowsers as well. So the application was publicly notified in June or after June 2020, and there were 489 submissions received regarding this development. Of those submissions, there were 376 which were properly made and received through the notification period, and we'll talk a bit more about those later. Of those submissions, approximately 90% were in opposition and 10% were in support. I'd just also like to advise Council that the applicant has very recently, as of this morning, requested that Council defer making his decision today to allow them time to respond to some remaining technical issues. This is a matter I'll leave to Council for consideration after the presentation and questions of officers. At this point, I'll hand over to Frank to step through some of the detailed planning issues.
My apologies. It's a good start. Thank you, Mark. As Mark mentioned, this application is being assessed under the provisions of the superseded 2007 Beaudesert planning scheme, and within that the scheme, the site is located within my apologies, not good mic technique. Sorry, it's within the rural residential precinct of the rural zone, and as Mark mentioned, it's as a relevant matter, considerations of the existing 2020 planning scheme is also we're also considering that. And for context, under the existing scheme, the site's in the rural residential A precinct of the rural residential zone. Now, within the rural residential zone, there's generally there's an expectation of the scheme, and also I think safe to say of the community, of that development will be of a low-key nature, reflective of that sort of low-density semi-rural sort of residential use. And so generally there's, I guess, a resistance to any sort of non-residential use unless there's an overriding need. And certainly with this, it's quite a considerable commercial development, which is going to be quite visually prominent by virtue of the fact it's on a slightly elevated area in the middle of quite a wide floodplain. They're going to fill it even higher, obviously, to try and to maximise flood immunity. And also the fact is that this is going to be a 24-hour business, which means there's going to be 24-hour illumination. As I said, generally such uses really are not consistent with the intent of the scheme, certainly not consistent with the intent of the rural zone and that precinct of the rural zone. Also, you could argue it's probably inconsistent with some relevant DEOs within the strategic framework, which talk about development with scale, sort of consistent with the local area. Also, managing expectations in terms of amenity impacts and things like that. So anyway, the applicant is trying to argue for the development fundamentally to I guess address these issues or the hump they have to go through based on economic need. And however, council has engaged a peer review of the materials they sent, and basically found that, I guess, the economic need is essentially not demonstrated. Basically disputes all their recommendations. Fundamentally, they've indicated that there really isn't that economic need. And one of the key things they found was, in fact, it's probably going to be quite detrimental economically, in particular to the community of Tamborine Village. So you've got the existing service stations there, and they do expect a considerable drop in turnover of them. So there's going to be a negative impact. So obviously we're talking about there, so they really haven't, it's inconsistent with, I guess, the nature and expectation of the type of development there, and yet they have not really demonstrated, I guess, that sort of economic need to justify it. And now we get into the elephant room, which of course is the flooding. It's in the middle of a significant floodplain of the Albert River. They have put considerable work, as Mark mentioned, to try and justify it. They're filling to try and make the ground level equivalent to the 1 in 100 level. That said, I don't think every flood is 1 in 100, and they're trying to give extra information with respect to emergency management plans. And we've got some sort of concerns there. We've actually had a peer review on that, and generally, with regards to looking at overall materials regarding addressing the flood matters, there's a general consensus in terms of intrinsically, they may well be able to deal with the issues. Despite that, it's still not there yet. There's still many more work. So certainly we have professional opinion feeling that they haven't actually fully addressed as of yet all the relevant matters, in particular with respect to the emergency plan. So now, one of the things is that Mark mentioned there's been a lot of community interest. There was 486 submissions, 376 were formally made, 90% being objections. Now, the issues largely raised probably very much match, I guess, the issues as we raise as council officers. You know, a lot of them sort of raise issues regarding amenity, the visual impact. In fact, it's there. They're worried about extra traffic generation, noise, and of course a number of the submissions mentioned sort of flood concerns, pollution. That's one of the issues too, of course. And also some submitters also were sceptical of the economic need. So fundamentally, I mean, we've got a situation where we feel that it's in the balance of probabilities. They're putting a development which really they haven't demonstrated a need, and yet also they're actually putting in an area, even though they're putting a lot of work to try and make it safe as much as possible. You're putting a major development which is going to attract a lot of people into an area which could be inundated for up to 16 to 24 hours, and it's reliant on a flood management plan, which of course, a flood management plan is only as good as the people who are there to administer it. So it may well be workable, but it's if we apply the proportionary principle, we're putting potentially a use which will put a lot of people in danger when there's not an overriding need to have a use which puts people potentially in danger. So I think that probably pretty much sums up these sort of officer concerns.
Thank you. Now might be an appropriate to open the floor questions. Councillors, points to clarify. Councillor McConnell.
Yeah, thank you for that report. You said that the level of the service station is equal to the 1 is to 100. Was that correct?
That's correct. We term it as the 1% risk, which is the requirement of the planning scheme.
Okay. If that was to exceed that by less than 20, 30 centimetres, would that affect the pollutant traps that are currently planned for that site?
Look, I'd have to take that question on notice. It's a technical issue that I would have to take advice on.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if it did go over the level that they have planned, is there anything that would stop the pollutants that are currently trapped from going into the rivers?
It comes down to the final design of those traps as to whether they build any safety allowance into those. So that is something that can be designed around in the final designs. Yep.
Okay.
I might go. Councillor West, did you have a question? Councillor McConnell will come back to you.
Well, I guess my question was, I know we've had correspondence from the applicants about deferring at the moment. I just wondered about the decision date and any of those things at this stage. Is that liable to be an issue, please?
So the decision date currently expires today. The applicant has indicated that there is a willingness to further extend that through further discussions with council. However, the officer's, I guess, consideration and the inconsistencies with the zoning is a high bench to overcome, and we don't feel that there's additional merit to be gained through prolonging the assessment process with any additional information to be provided by the applicant.
For Councillor McConnell, you.
Yeah, just going back to your comments about 2 service stations in Tamborine and now a large one and the impact that will have on the businesses within Tamborine or Tamborine Village, is there anything in the planning scheme that prevents or stops because there's another business or 2 businesses within the same area?
So as a relevant matter, the applicant's contending an economic need. So whilst the planning scheme isn't descriptive to that degree, we're looking at it on the basis that there's a conflict with the scheme and they're providing the economic need of this development as the reason to support it as sufficient grounds despite the conflict. In our consideration and as reflected in the peer review undertaken, there is a potential detrimental impact to existing uses of the similar nature around the vicinity of it. So that does form a consideration of us as officers, whether sufficient grounds have been demonstrated to recommend approval, despite the conflict with the scheme.
Thank you.
Councillor McInnes.
Could I just follow on from that question of Councillor McConnell's? Do you take into account when assessing that the 24 hours that they're operating compared to other servos? I think I'm right in saying that virtually every other servo wouldn't be operating 24 hours a day.
I would have to. Yeah, sorry.
Is that taken into account? Is my question.
It probably does form the peer review, but I'd have to take that on notice and further investigate.
No, sorry. I'm asking the question. Does that affect your view in disagreeing with the peer review?
In terms of the overall operation being on a 24-hour basis. I mean, in the end of the day, we're referring back to our peer review undertaken by the Economic Needs Assessment, which concludes that it would have that detrimental impact. Informing their position, that would obviously be an element to it.
Councillor Swanborough, you had a question?
Yeah, just in relation to the economic impacts. From what I understand, the trucking business believe that there's not provision at the moment for catering for them in the region. I understand that they would never be able to be catered for by the existing Tamborine Village service station. There's just not the room to be able to do that. In assessing economic need, are we considering the economic benefit to the whole of the region as a result of the facilitation of increased truck movements, what that brings to the overall economy of the region, and is that addressed in the economic need report?
So, with a development like this, it's not going to attract new vehicles. It's basically providing additional convenience for the existing vehicles. Those trucks are going there now, and they're being fueled up wherever. Some have their own fuel facilities. They have access to fuel facilities where their destination, whether that's the coast or Brisbane or Canungra. So there are other facilities available. And I think that's what the economic needs peer review addressed, that those trucks now are getting fuel, and they're able to be fueled under their current arrangements, whatever they may be. So there's a difference between need and convenience. There's probably a level of convenience in this location, there's no doubt about that. But is there a need? And that need is strong enough that it overrides both the planning principles and the flood risk, is where we're coming from.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Swanborough.
I understand the impact of noise and light and whatever. Could you just tell me, given that location, how many residences would be directly impacted by that? It seems to be a little bit of although it isn't a residential low density area, physically there doesn't appear to be, certainly 504 objections don't reflect the number of residences that might be directly impacted by it. So what is your comment in relation to that?
Yep. So the property itself is effectively borders via a road into rural area. There's no doubt about that. So it is on the edge of the rural residential precinct. It is adjacent to two houses, very close to it on the same properties. The one next door, I believe, is actually in support of the application. But you also have rural residential across the main highway to the north. I won't guess at the number of houses that look directly over it, but it's 10, 15, a dozen, something like that. Then you also have the ones to the east as well. You come back towards Canungra, you have that estate in there where there's several houses fronting, on the road frontage, as well as those a bit further back. So, yes, they are larger rural blocks. Not all of them overlook, but there is certainly a significant number, and quite a number of those would be affected by the change in what would be the outlook of that area from what is now rural residential to very much a more commercial nature.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor McConnell.
Just going back to the flood impact. It's in the flood zone, but is that flood zone still water or running water?
So the flood mapping and modelling we've done over the time indicates that it is high hazard area. So effectively, when the river breaks its banks, there's another river that encircles the site. It is very deep water and it is fast water, and that's also backed up by anecdotal historical issues of the site.
When you say anecdotal issues, can you elaborate on any issues that have arisen in the last, since say 2017?
So, yeah, the sites there and the houses there is history in relation to flooding, and in some cases required flood rescue from people in those houses. And I believe the latest was the 2017 flood where that rescue was carried out at night.
Yep.
That would be correct?
That is correct. And not to get into thing, but it was fast flowing. So the flood boat that went across from the Tambourine side to rescue those residents was probably about 3/4 power to get across that. So it wasn't a slow flow. It was definitely very hazardous.
So, Councillor West, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to add to that we need to be mindful of that the rescue organisations are volunteers who were involved in those processes.
We'll come to comments shortly, which I might add to some of that. But any other questions, councillors? Councillor McConnell.
So you said in your statement that the applicant would prefer deferrals for them to be able to have a look at a few issues. Is there any legal requirement for us to allow that referral? Is there any legal impediments to granting them a deferral on this?
Okay,
so that was, just to clarify, that was 2 questions, not one. That was both sides of the coin that the councillor asked. So just wanted to make sure you heard both questions.
I think I did. Okay, so yeah, as Joseph indicated, today is the last day we have under the planning rules to assess and make a decision. That can be extended. If council chooses not to make a decision today and put it on the table, there are 2 things that can happen. One is the applicant would be agreeable to it, and they've indicated they would be. 2, they can extend that time by agreement, so the process continues. If the applicant did not agree to extend the time, the application sits and we can continue to process it. However, the applicant would have what we call a deemed refusal option, where they could take a deemed refusal and as if council had refused it formally. I'm not sure that, from the indication from the applicant, they're keen to try and address council's concerns.
Thank you.
Does that answer both questions, councillor?
Yes, both questions here.
Thank you. Further questions? Any additional comments on this proposal, councillors, before we move forward to consider recommendations? I would add a comment that from a chair of LDMG perspective, in 2017 and again in the most recent events of 22, the roads in the vicinity of this area have become significantly impacted, and the photographic evidence, particularly from 17, but also from this occasion, of the levels of flow and the levels of impact. I'm very clear in my mind of the large signs at the end of Mundula Connection Road in this vicinity being laid over onto their back due to the water pressure against them in the prior event. So that adds weight, to the need for proper solutions around the flood risk for anything proposed. And I think it's important in our considerations to recognise that outside of our direct considerations of a particular proposal, from a federal and state perspective, there is a significant focus and shift of conversation around more stringent future consideration and constraint around any form of development in known floodplains. That may not be in our planning scheme at the moment, will certainly be an impact for any future consideration as well. There's a $700 million fund to help resolve decisions of the past that's been announced. Any other comments? Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, I will agree with you on that. Being the SES controller at the time of the 2017 floods, and having to send the floodboat crew across that road, the operator at the time said it was one of the scariest things he's had to do. To not point the boat in the direction you had to go, but to point it upriver and give it 3/4 power, and then edge away across there to pick up people. And I think if we were to approve it and then have more people stuck at that location, I think would be irresponsible of us as planners and approvers to do that. I agree that we should be looking now that anything in a flood area has to have 110% scrutiny to ensure that we don't create the legacy issues that have been put on us over the last 200 years. Yes, we always put towns on rivers in the past, and I think we'll probably find we'll move away from that. But the flow going across there, and just in this recent event we had 2020, it was the same thing, went across there as well, and just across the border more rain fell. So if that had fallen 30 kilometres north, all that water would have come down through here, through the Canungra Creek and the Albert River, and I don't think it'd be appropriate to...
Councillor,
Yeah.
I'm going to be just ask you
Really
to...
quick?
I'm going to ask you to reserve the assessment comments from the observation comments, so we're not confusing the process.
Yeah, it's just,
you can reserve some of those for speaking to the motion potentially.
It's one of those situations where the risk outweighs the benefit, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Now, the next step process, if we've got no further clarifications or comments, ask to introduce the recommendation, and then councillors consider how they wish to proceed.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Before you today is a two-part recommendation that one, council receive and note the report titled MCU 19/027 Development Permit for Material Change of Use Service Station at 251 Beaudesert Beanley Road, Tamborine, Lot 144, RP 151365. Two, that council resolve to refuse the development application MCU 19/027 for the following reasons. A, the proposed development conflicts with the following provisions of the relevant local government planning instrument, being the Beaudesert Shire Planning Scheme 2007. Of 1, Section 2.1.3, desired outcomes 2J2 and 3 IP8 and desired environmental outcomes 3, B and C. 2, that Rural Zone Code Table 3.3.11 specific outcomes SO1 and SO2. 3, Rural Zone Code Table 3.3.10 overall outcomes 002, 004, 006, 007, 0017, 0024, 0042 and 0051. And 4, Construction and Infrastructure Codes Tables 5.3.8 specific outcomes SO3 and SO12. 5, Construction and Infrastructure Code Table 5.3.9 specific outcomes SO14 and SO147. And B, the proposed development conflicts with the following provisions of a relevant temporary local planning instrument being TLPI 01/2019, the flood hazard. And 1, item 3, development constraints overlay specific outcomes SO1, SO3 and SO4. C, the applicant has not demonstrated sufficient grounds to support the proposed development despite the above-mentioned conflicts. And D, the proposed development could not otherwise be conditioned to achieve compliance within the above-mentioned conflicts.
Councillors, we have a recommendation. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional discussion? Councillor McConnell.
Yeah, just looking at the overall location, Tamborine Village is a growing area with Yarrabilba just to the north of it, which will be a huge development and will probably incorporate some of these larger service stations. Does that have, between the councillors, does that have an impact on how we approve things? If it's already outside of, it is, Yarrabilba's outside our area and so is back towards Cedar Creek. What are the thoughts?
Well, Councillor,
We're having a discussion, aren't we?
for discussion by councillors. We're not considering a motion at the moment. So, councillors, Councillor Swanborough.
The councillors just asked the question. Yarrabilba is primarily residential at this point in time, and you have to drive off the highway to get into it. I wouldn't see that that'd be convenient for a truck stop, which really needs to be on a major arterial road to be profitable.
Councillor McConnell, I didn't think you were talking about Yarrabilba as a location. You were talking about the impact of it and what's happening in Tamborine.
Yeah. In relation to, we have the two service stations that are there are small and hard to get into and out of. They're designed in the 50s, which were nice and easy, and the road was a bit more open. So, but at the moment, with increased traffic, it is hard to get in and out of both at the moment. Well, semi-trailers can't. Well, you can sort of use the shell, but it's not that convenient if you want to turn back towards the roundabout. But it's more on. I think the plan is that road, it'll cut through Yarrabilba from Beavers Road eventually. But it's more, we want to grow, we want to have things in Tamborine Village, but is it the right location? You know, it's a bit of a toss-up. We want to grow, we want to have better service stations. But then, yeah, Michael?
So, do you have any other discussion, councillors? Your thoughts?
Mayor, before we progress too much further, I'd like to explore the appetite on whether the council has an appetite to defer.
Well, councillor, process-wise, what we are at the moment, we have a motion with a motion in line with the recommendation that has a mover, not a seconder. and a motion to defer wouldn't be consistent with that, so we couldn't take that under consideration whilst this motion is in the process of being moved forward to potentially be considered. And the only way we could consider that motion would be for the original mover to be prepared to withdraw his motion to allow that to be considered before it. So I would have to turn to Councillor McConnell.
Isn't that a procedural motion?
Doesn't matter, it's in conflict. It's in conflict with the motion as it rests on the table, so regardless of what form of motion it is, it's just in conflict. So I'd need to seek your forbearance to withdraw your motion, Councillor McConnell, to explore that concept from Councillor Enright before proceeding.
I will withdraw just happily to
Thank you.
to investigate.
Thank you, Councillor. That's please noted. Okay. Now, Councillor Enright, do you wish to introduce an alternative proposed motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would. That Council defers the decision on this item to allow the applicant to provide additional information as requested.
Okay. So,
By the applicant. The applicant.
So we might just have to watch your heads, get this up on screen so we're sure of what the councillor is proposing as a procedural motion, and then we can seek any clarity to it. Just while we're getting the projector to come alive. For those in the gallery, I believe Councillor Enright's proposal is in the context of the advice received and expressed by the manager in, I forget who it was now, in the presentation earlier of this issue. It's warming up. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. If you could add additional words at the end as requested by the applicant.
Councillor, it may be beneficial to consider with deferring an item, deferring a matter. It's maybe beneficial to indicate a future date. Well, we can. This is relevant to this item, so that's clear. But perhaps what sort of time frame, whether that's beneficial or not sure. The officers might have some advice for you.
I'd be somewhat reluctant to put a time frame because some of this is quite detailed and technical information for which we would then probably need to have peer reviewed as well. So I would expect that any extension or discussions that would ensue would be quite take some time.
So Councillor, can I then just suggest that it's beneficial that the defer the matter rather than the decision?
Happy with that?
To a future meeting. I was getting there.
Yes. Defer the matter to a future meeting.
Item is what the councillor said. We'd normally refer to it as the matter, but would be the standing orders identify it as to the matter, if that's okay.
Happy
Councillor.
if it to be changed to matter.
It just keeps consistency and avoids confusion. Thank you, councillor. That's a procedural. That's a procedural motion, so it doesn't need a seconder. Councillors, do you have any questions for the motion before the councillors we progress to speaking to it? Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, Mayor, could I ask the manager that given the time that the applicants have had to come back to, they've been well aware of this decision for a number of days, it seems strange to me that they've just at the last moment they've actually wanted it deferred now. Have there been discussions take place in the last number of days?
So the applicant would not have been aware of the decision to or the recommendation to refuse until such times it went online. There were discussions yesterday with officers and some emails this morning.
So they would have known about it last Thursday, or they could have very
Potentially.
well. Potentially, yeah.
Further questions for either the councillor or for clarification to this item? Councillor Enright, would you perhaps clarify in your mind why this is a worthwhile consideration before we're not talking in favour of the motion, but what's behind your thinking? Just from a
Thank you, Mayor. I'm conscious of the considerable effort that's been contributed by the applicant and by council through this process, noting that the application was submitted originally in 2019, so it's coming into its third year of consideration. Given the complexity to it, given the very recent request from the applicant that it be deferred, I think it's appropriate to give them every opportunity to provide applicable responses and opportunity, and given that there is no risk to council in a potential deferment, I think it just shows respect to the applicant and provides every opportunity for the questions to be raised without any risk to council.
Thank you, councillor. Any other questions for councillor Enright? Councillor McCollum?
Given the fact we're going to defer and go back, there'll be an increase in, or an additional cost in council officers' time and effort to re-go over all of the information that we've just identified a refusal for. And given that what was spoken about, the location and the flood impact there, do you think there would be I don't know if I can ask, do you think there would be a change in our stance at this time?
I'll answer it by asking a question.
Yep.
Is there something that the applicant could do and demonstrate to council that would change your current opinions?
I'm going to ask councillors not to answer that because none of us are technical specialists. So thank you for the rhetorical moment. However, it would not be appropriate for councillors to try to position themselves as being capable of determining what the technical response should be. That's for the applicant to consider if they are given that opportunity, and even if they don't take this opportunity, they may want to consider that in another forum. So any additional clarifications for Councillor Swanborough?
Yeah, my question would be, just looking at a future scenario, wouldn't it be in council's interest to actually have all the information that is available? And we're hearing that we may not have all the information. And now, if and when it potentially would go to court, wouldn't we be in a stronger position to have said, look, we cooperated with the developer, we allowed him an extension of time to put his best case forward, and then council's considered the matter based on all the evidence available, and whatever the decision is, that was the decision that was taken. Wouldn't that be seen as a reasonable approach, given that there's every likelihood that this may end up in Planning and Environment Court?
So, I'm not sure that's a question that officers can reasonably respond to. You've sort of answered the question with some assumptions, and I don't think it's fair for officers to be asked around that. I think the applicant has made clear, as we were advised, that they believe there is opportunity that they'd like to provide additional information. What we are looking at is a procedural motion. I'm just getting us back to where we should be. A procedural motion from Councillor Enright. If there's no more clarification of Councillor Enright, I'm going to ask, if you have one more question for Councillor? Yes?
Would this create a precedence because we've put a refusal in, the developer has then come back and said, oh, look, you know, we've got more information or we've got this. Does this now open the floodgates every time we say, yeah, it's a refusal, and on the day of the meeting they call us up and say, oh, no, we've got more information, please defer, please defer. Does that open the floodgates for this now to become a precedent?
Again, Councillor, I don't think that's a question that anyone can answer, and I'm not sure it's one that Councillor Enright can foresee. So I understand the question. I just don't think there is any of us here who have that prophetic wisdom to respond. We are skilled, but perhaps not quite that skilled. So, Councillor Enright, I'm going to defer you if you wish to introduce your motion.
Thank you, Mayor. We've had a bit of discussion through the day in the meeting about partnerships, and I guess to a certain extent we like to establish relationships with our businesses in the area as a partnership. A development application is a very important part of that relationship, and for us to maintain and continue a relationship with our business partners, I think it's important that we do show respect in the process, and given that this application is in its third year of process, I don't think a moderate extension of time to provide them every opportunity, I think it is a respectful process to go through, given the complexities of this application. So I think it's the right thing to do, to provide them every opportunity to provide their best case for us to then consider at a future date.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking to speak additionally? Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I just want to mention that these applicants are local business people and have been in the area for quite a substantial time. I know the officers have put an immense amount of work into this, assessing this application, and we don't know what the outcome may still be the same, but I just believe we need to give them the respect of the extra conversation that they have asked for yesterday. So I'm happy to support the motion.
Anyone else wishing to speak additionally? I will take the opportunity to speak in support of this procedural motion. Certainly, this is a complex development. It's in a complex location. The complexity of the information and the breadth of the interest in the matter demonstrate a wide range of thinking on the location, and the clarity of information is important. I think council, wherever possible, our role is to position ourselves effectively on the highest moral ground possible in issues, and where this is a request which has, whether we might agree with it, has a rationale behind the additional information that's possible. Whether it changes the outcome or not is not what we're considering at the moment. It's whether it's reasonable to give the opportunity to present that additional information. I believe that's beholden on us as being responsible and thoughtful in our deliberations. And yes, it does create an additional impost on the team, and that's something that we will have to apologise to them for. However, maintaining that strong positioning as fair, reasonable and objective in our deliberations is something that the community need to be able to rely on. So I support this motion because it supports that intent. Anyone else wishing to speak? Wish to close, councillor? Put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, officers, for your diligence in this work. I know there have been some challenges over a 3-year period with staff changes, but really appreciate the professionalism with which you approach your work, and look forward to when this matter can return for future consideration. Thank you. So, councillors, I'll just reorganise a couple of papers here. That brings us to the end of the identified open agenda items for today. We have one remaining matter identified as 11.1 confidential to consider advice regarding the closure of meetings for health and safety reasons, which is closed under section 254J3E. If there's no concerns about that, then I would seek a motion to proceed into closed session for us to consider that matter. Seek a mover. Councillor West. Any additional discussion to the item? Seek a seconder. Councillor McGuinness. Any need to speak, councillor? If not, anyone wishing to speak against? If not, anyone speak additionally? Not. Those in favour? Thank you, councillors. And as we move into closed session, I would just apologise to those in the digital gallery. I'm informed that the broadcast dropped out for approximately 3 minutes, somewhere around 11:20-ish. However, I remind you again that it will be in the complete recording when it is posted to the website. However, for now, we will adjourn into confidential session, and whilst it is only one matter, I cannot reliably confirm the likely timing. What I will say is that we will endeavour to return on the half-hour mark. So we will, if we're finished at this discussion at 12, then we'll return at 12. Otherwise, it would be 12:30 or it would be 1. That's the best I can offer to you in the gallery. I apologise. Bid you good morning for now. Welcome back, councillors, and we now return from closed session into open session. And we have one matter to consider. GM, I'd ask you to introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that council receive and note the content of the report and advice provided.
Pause. Sorry. I need a mover and seconder to return into open. I apologise. Sorry. Councillor Enright, Councillor West, those in favour? So we have returned. Now continue.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, eager.
Too patient, too impatient, yes.
Thank you, sir. The recommendation for item 11.1 is that council receive and note the content of the report and advice provided regarding the closure of meetings for health and safety reasons. And 2, in accordance with clause 22.6.3 of the Scenic Room Regional Council Standing Orders Procedure CM03.01 PR.01, council maintain confidentiality over the contents of this report, including the attached legal advice, and due to the confidentiality requirements, the report not be released.
Seeker mover. Councillor Enright. Any further clarification to the motion? Any discussion? Seeker seconder. Councillor Chalk. Wish to speak. Councillor Enright. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the close of the business of the ordinary meeting of the 12th of April 2022. Thank you to those in the digital gallery, and just a reminder as we sign off that even though there may have been some technical difficulties with the live broadcast, the full recording will be available subsequently via council website to catch up any of those areas that may have been difficult. Thank you for your time and bid you good day. Meeting's closed.